Hey, what's up YouTube? Saf here on Super Saf TV, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the specs of the iPad mini 2 or the iPad mini Retina, I'm going to call it 2 throughout this video, versus the Google Nexus 7 version 2. So basically the second generation versions of both of these devices. Now the iPad mini version 2 has just been announced today and it's boasting some seriously nice updates in terms of spec. But how does it compare to one of the most popular Android tablets of 2013, the Google Nexus 7 version 2? I've got it here. If you do want to see a full review of the Nexus 7 version 2, then there is a link in the description below. Do go ahead and check that out. But what are the key differences between these two here? Well, do hit that thumbs up button and let's find out in this head-to-head spec comparison. So initially looking at these screen sizes, they both come in a similar form factor, but you've got 7 inches on the Nexus 7 2 versus 7.9 inches on the iPad mini 2, so the same size as the previous iPad mini. Now if I just bring over the current iPad mini, which is the exact same size, you can see that you've got a slightly larger screen on the iPad mini compared to the Nexus 7 version 2, and that's because it has a different ratio. You've got a 16:10 ratio on the Nexus 7 version 2 versus the 4:3 screen on the iPad mini 2. So it is a slightly larger of a screen, so it's more square versus the more rectangle screen of the Nexus 7 version 2. Now resolution, you've got 1920 by 1200 on the Nexus 7 2, so it's slightly more than HD, and on the iPad mini 2 you've got 2048 by 1536. You've got a Retina display on the iPad mini 2 finally. The biggest disappointment of the iPad mini version 1 was the fact that it didn't have the Retina display, so that's great to see that they have listened and they've included this in the new iPad mini. The PPI 324 versus 323, so practically the same PPI. Some of the best PPIs out there. I believe on any tablet, these are the highest pixel densities that you're going to be seeing. So that's absolutely great to see on both of these devices. That sharp and crisp display, you're not going to have any problems with the displays on either of these devices. Now in terms of size, because the Nexus 7 does have a slightly smaller screen, it is smaller in terms of the dimensions as well. Same in height, 200 millimeters in height. Both of these are so the exact same, again similar to the iPad mini original as well. We've not got a difference here. But in terms of width, the Nexus 7 is smaller, 20.7 millimeters, so holding it in the one hand is going to be slightly easier. Again, if I bring over the iPad mini, if you have a look at these, it's not bad, but depending on your size of your hands, for mine it's absolutely fine on the iPad mini, but it's just that a little bit more comfortable to hold the Nexus 7 in your one hand because of the smaller width. In terms of the thickness, the iPad mini 2 is roughly just over 1 millimeter thinner than the Nexus 7 version 2, but in terms of form factors, you've got similar form factors here. The Nexus 7 version 2 is lighter, 41 grams lighter however compared to the iPad mini 2, so overall the Nexus 7 is more of a compact device. Now the lower weight also comes down to the build materials. The Nexus 7 version 2 does have that plastic, soft touch plastic, so it is quite nice and grippy, but the iPad mini 2 has the aluminium unibody design that most of the Apple products now incorporate, so that premium sort of feel. Not to say that the Nexus 7 version 2 is not premium, but you're going to get a bit more of a premium feel on the iPad mini 2. Now the internals, the Nexus 7 version 2 quad-core 1.5 GHz processor, and it's the Snapdragon S4 Pro, very fast and snappy, one of the best out there. The iPad mini 2, they've gone for the A7 processor, the 64-bit chip. Now this is 1.3 GHz dual core. Now although we've got dual core versus quad core, in terms of benchmarks with the iPhone 5s, which also has the A7 64-bit chip, it's absolutely fast and snappy, smashing benchmarks out there. Now day-to-day usage, I don't think you're going to be noticing a huge deal of difference, and both of these are some of the best processors out there. We'll have to see benchmarks to see exactly what the differences are. I'm not sure most people are going to be noticing any real difference between these two, but great processors on both of these devices. The iPad mini 2 also comes with the M7 motion coprocessor, so now this is going to track motion data and not going to wake up the main CPU, so it's going to save battery as well, so a little bit of an advantage here because of that additional processor. Now RAM, you've got 1 GB of RAM versus 2 GB of RAM, so RAM is really useful for multitasking and things. Once again, we'll have to see these more side by side, but the Nexus 7 version 2 does have the advantage of more RAM. Now in terms of the different storage options available, the Nexus 7 version 2 comes in the 16 and 32 GB Wi-Fi only versions. You've also got Wi-Fi and cellular 32 GB version there as well. The iPad mini 2 on the other hand comes in 16, 32, 64, and 128 gigabyte storage options. Massive 128 gigabytes. That's absolutely insane. I'm not sure how many people will actually want that much storage on there, but that's great to see that you do have these options here. All of these options are available in the cellular and Wi-Fi, as well as the Wi-Fi only versions. So a lot more options here on the iPad mini 2 side. And if you are somebody who does like a lot of storage on your tablet, then you are going to have a lot more variety and a lot more options on the iPad mini 2. Now in terms of the cameras, both of these have a 5 megapixel rear facing camera capable of filming 1080p HD. The front facing cameras are 1.2 megapixels on both of these as well, capable of filming 720p HD. So very similar in terms of the specs. We'll have to see these side by side in terms of quality, but generally speaking on tablets, you're mainly going to be using them for conference calling and things. I'm not sure how many people actually use their tablets to take pictures generally. Mostly for conference calls and things over FaceTime, Skype and things like that. Now the operating systems, you've got Android versus iOS. iOS 7.1 on the iPad mini 2. On the Nexus 7 version 2, you've got Jelly Bean 4.3.1. Now the advantage that you've got with both of these devices is that you're going to be getting updates directly from the manufacturers. You're not going to have to wait around for any third parties or anything like that, because they come directly from the manufacturers themselves. So for example, the Nexus 7 comes from Google and the iPad mini comes directly from Apple. So that's one advantage that you've got on both of these, that you're going to be getting updates right away, which is great to see. Now just to mention some differences in features, you've got NFC, you've got SlimPort HDMI, and you've also got wireless charging on the Nexus 7 version 2. These features are not available on the iPad mini 2, but what you do have on the iPad mini 2 is MIMO WiFi. So now this is dual antennas on the device itself, which is supposed to give you much faster Wi-Fi speeds as well. We'll have to see this in practice. This is something new that Apple have introduced, so that'll be interesting to see, but you've got some differences here in terms of the additional features that both of these tablets offer. Now in terms of battery, you've got a 3950 milliamp battery on the Nexus 7 version 2. They've not specified exactly what the milliamps are on the battery of the iPad mini version 2, but in terms of usage times, they've advertised 10 hours versus the 9 hours of the Nexus 7 version 2. So usage we'll have to see, but they are claiming that the iPad mini 2 does have slightly more battery compared to the Nexus 7 version 2. Now finally, looking at the price, the Nexus 7 version 2, you can pick it up for £199 here in the UK, $229. Very budget pricing here. This is for the 16GB version. Now if we compare like for like, the 16GB version on the iPad mini 2, it's going to be available for £319 here in the UK or $399 in the US, with a release date of mid-November worldwide. That's one thing that I do like about Apple, that they do release it in lots of different places at one time, whereas the Nexus 7 was available in the US and then got it a month later in the UK, which was very annoying. But the price difference, there's a massive price difference between the Nexus 7 version 2 and the iPad mini 2. So those are the key differences between these two devices, both of them at the top of the line in terms of this form factor and offering some of the best specs out there as well. The biggest difference between these two has to be the price. The Nexus 7 version 2 coming in quite a bit cheaper compared to the iPad mini 2, and if you are somebody that's on a budget, or if price is a concern to you, then the Nexus 7 version 2 is definitely going to be the more compelling option. However, if you are somebody who prefers Apple devices, then the iPad mini 2 is a great option. Some definitely welcomed upgrades compared to the iPad mini original. Which of these devices would you go for? Which one do you think is better? Do drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, as always, please do hit that thumbs up button for me. It really does help me out. And why not subscribe to the channel? I've got plenty more content coming up in here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time. If you want to see more regular videos like this one, then be sure to hit the subscribe button, which will be below. If you're on a mobile device, it may be somewhere else. If you want to see my previous related video, then hit the link right here. If you want to stay in touch over Facebook, Twitter and Google+, then all of the addresses will be there somewhere, as well as direct links in the description below.